welcome back. This is the last episode of Akamai's Gaming Masterclass. The short introduction to the session is the next billion is perhaps the most sought after target for most industries and disruptive trends, accelerated by the pandemic and now almost a table stakes BHAG for startups and large enterprises. We all know how gaming hungry India's diverse demography is, and yet as our game development prowess increases from strength to strength, we continue to observe the most foundational pillars of product development principles becoming common afterthought. Building for scale, securing every touch point, underscoring the need for user and data security, and so on. Where does one begin or introduce these OKRs into the development process? How have these broad brush tenets evolved over time and borrowed learnings from other complex industries? What role do VCs play today in guiding founders and teams towards building for scale, performance, and security? Join us for the final gaming masterclass in the Akamai Gaming on Studio series for a chat on these areas and more with Akamai's Aparna Rayasam, Senior VP and GM for Application Security, and Jonathan Singer, Senior Industry Marketing Manager, Shahan Sood, Investment Professional from Indian Angel Network, Aditya Deshpande, Investment Analyst at Lumikai Fund, and me, myself, Nikhil, Malankar, CEO of Gaming on Studios. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thanks, Nikhil. And for 5 of these episodes so far, you've given me this wonderful cold open, and every single time I've stopped, because I want to thank you again for being such a gracious host. I've really had a lot of fun doing these sessions with you, and I think that I've learned a lot. I hope you've learned something. I hope the audience has learned something. So this has just really been fantastic. So the reason that we're talking about the next billion players today, to sort of dive in, is twofold. One, I happen to like this topic. It's incredibly pertinent to India and what's going on in the massive amount of growth that the industry is seeing. And the second is the title of this was actually the first presentation I ever had to give in this current role covering the video games industry. And one of the things I talked about was the potential for future growth in India. So I'm so pleased to be here and be absolutely correct. I just wish I had found a way to make myself rich off of it, but hopefully there are some other people who can help some others in that respect. So let's do some introductions. For those of you who don't know me, Jonathan Singer. I've been covering this space for 4.5 years and a lifelong gamer. And I'm going to introduce the other folks and give them just a few seconds to talk about themselves. So Aparna, I'm going to start with you.
All right. Hi there. My name is Aparna Rayasam. I am SVP and GM for Akamai's application security business. I've been in the security business for at least 15 years at this point, and have had the ringside view of really how the application security market and really security market has evolved over the last many years. And thanks to Akamai's unparalleled visibility, you see the trends before they're forming. So it's been a very, very exciting evolution over the last 15 years.
Okay, thanks, Aparna. Aditya, I'll go with you next.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Hey, everyone. This is Aditya. I am a part of the investments team at Lumikai, which is India's first early stage gaming and interactive media fund. Effectively, we're an early stage fund that is set to focus completely on gaming and interactive media, and therefore we have sort of a very closeness to the Indian gaming ecosystem. We've invested across the likes of Loco, Elo, All Star Games, Studio Sera, and Bombay Play, to name a few. So at Lumikai, I am basically, I think my primary responsibilities are of course, everything on the deal flow front. So sourcing deals, evaluating them, reviewing it with our partners, working closely with them, and then just looking at closures or diligence, and then all the sort of the nasty paperwork that you have to do, and then of course graduate them to a portfolio level where we sort of work closely with them to sort of help them achieve the next billion players. And secondly, of course, is a lot around research. So if it's internal theses or internal mapping of certain sectors, and also anything we do for the public. So for example, we put out a report very recently on the Indian gaming market. So anything around that front as well is what I look at closely. And of course, Lumikai looks at closely. So just a quick sort of background on myself. I've been at Lumikai for a little more than a year. Have been a lifelong gamer. I think very recently just been churning away at Destiny 2 mostly, and being really bad at Warzone. But I think largely my favorite, I think, games of all time have to be the Uncharted series. Ghost of Tsushima is also part of it now. And I think on the mobile, really love Archero for sort of really opening up a new dimension when it comes to that genre. But yeah, and I have a degree in finance and a bachelor's in economics as well. Fun fact, Shahan and I were batchmates once upon a time during our bachelor's. But yeah, that's broadly my intro.
Okay, thanks so much, Aditya. Shahan, why don't you give a quick intro and then we'll dive into some questions.
Oh, thanks, John. Thanks, John and Nikhil, for having me. Lovely to be here. I'm part of the investment teams at IIN, primarily looking at consumer and tech deals here. In the last 9 months, I've been able to close 2 deals. In addition to this, I've, over the years, developed a passion for consumer trends. And I keep publishing articles, whether in HT Mint, Times of India, just to share my insights with everyone. Prior to this, I was in investment banking in Bombay, and like Aditya mentioned, we were batchmates at Christ, and I have a bachelor's in economics too. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us. So let's start by laying out the general context. And a lot of the folks who are listening are in the gaming industry there, as opposed to just trying to get into it. But I think it's still good to set the stage. So 4.5 years ago, when I started talking about the next billion players, I was looking at markets where there was an increasing 3G, 4G penetration, higher mobile rates, falling price of smartphones, and I was looking at the convergence of that free-to-play games. This was before Fortnite bust out onto the scene. PUBG was still kind of in its infancy, and all those kind of converging trends led me to believe that markets like India were sort of the future of growth. So that's where we stood 4.5 years ago. But I'd like to start with Aditya to talk a little bit from Lubikai's perspective about where the Indian market is right now. And Shahan, I'll ask you this as well. But Aditya, let's start with you.
Sure. I think, Jonathan, the macro and the infra sort of drivers that you mentioned are on point. I think they all sort of pointed towards the explosion of just the internet in India, and then the consumer internet and sort of whatever's fanned out outside of that, and gaming, of course, being a large part of it. I think what media and entertainment in general and what gaming has done in India, I think, is either A, violated certain narratives that people had in mind, or B, exceed the expectations, right? So if I was to talk from a media and entertainment lens, in the early 90s, everyone thought no one's going to pay for a Star or a ZTV channel, for example, and that was violated. In the early 2000s, everyone said no one's going to adopt satellite TV or DTH, right? That was violated. Very recently, you had people saying that no one's going to adopt streaming services in India. That was violated. And the sort of the broader thesis out of that is that as long as that there is sort of value for money, Indians are willing to pay for novel forms of entertainment. And we are seeing very similar inflection points in gaming as well, where 2 to 3 years ago, or John, as you mentioned, 4 years ago, you had people saying that India is just a DAO farm, basically. It's where you only get users and nothing relevant out of it. Or Indians will not pay for games. Indians will not really adopt mobile gaming, etc. And we've seen each of those narratives really shatter in front of our eyes. And this is actually corroborated by on-ground research, for example, that we've done. And we've kind of estimated the market right now to be at around $2.1, $2.2 billion just in terms of, I guess, revenue, if you want to count that. And though RMG is kind of a large part of that, and that sort of like was the wave of gaming that really kind of initially took off. But what we feel is that, for lack of a better word, traditional gaming, I'm talking about content, platform, etc., plays will really drive growth going forward, right? So I'm talking mid-core, casual, hyper-casual, core, all of these genres that we've come to be familiar with, for example. And the reason for that is, for example, we sort of conducted a survey of close to 3,000 gamers in the country, and we saw that average spends yearly are close to $16 across all genres, including RMG, including, say, streaming, etc. And the sort of our idea in our heads was, this is probably positively skewed because of RMG, but it actually turned out to the contrary, that people spend $17 to $14 per month on mid-core and core, right? So this is driven by, say, your Genshin Impact, driven by BGMI, driven by Free Fire, etc. And people are at least an Indian gamer is willing to pay in game. And that was, I think, a sort of a big eye-opening moment for us. And we're seeing, I think, on the overall gamer base, a conversion of like 20 to 23%. So I think just backed by these facts and this sort of on-ground data, I think we're very optimistic of where this is headed, especially from, I think, a content angle, B, for example, what the space Nikhil is building, right? So from a content angle, B, from a platform angle, and I think and across all genres. And I think thirdly, very importantly, to sort of support and buttress all of this also from an infra and tech angle as well, where those are also some interesting plays that are sort of come across the table and we've looked at. So I think that's broadly where sort of the Indian gaming market is, and with 450 to 500 million gamers, and that's probably growing 20 to 25% year on year, driven by smartphone adoption, which is at like 700 million. We're kind of just halfway through to the entire population, if you really think about it, and internet penetration, and driven by all of that, and by the sort of broader thesis that, listen, we're as your average Indian is willing to play and willing to pay when it comes to novel sort of entertainment avenues. So I think that's broadly where we stand on that.
Fantastic. I always find it to be really funny before the games industry kind of grows in an area that people are like, oh, well, people really pay for this. It's like, everyone wants to have fun.
Yeah.
And when you interact with a screen all day, that's one of the primary places where you might look to it. So Shahan, Aditya just laid out a really good sketch of things. Do you have anything that you'd like to add on that as well? Because you come from a different perspective, being on the angel side versus the VC side. So let's talk a little bit about that as well.
Got it. So definitely. John, if you look at it, like taking a cue from what Aditya said, if you compare the numbers pre-COVID and post-COVID, the DAUs, the daily active users, have actually risen. The paid users vis-a-vis what was there earlier have risen. So and this is largely for the Indian target market. So if you look at the numbers, they are saying that yes, Indians are willing to pay for swiping on their phones. Indians are willing to pay for casual entertainment. So and another trend which perhaps which is very important to capture here is that largely what gaming is trying to do is trying to capture the attention economy, right? So I have 1 hour of my time. I can watch a movie. I can read a book, but I can also play games, right? So in today's time, all these three are competing with each other. They're competing for my time. They're competing for me to actively engage with something, right? And games do it really well. The game mechanics that are around there, they really engage. They really help you to play. They give you the dopamine that you need. And all social media giants are actually have taken cues from the gaming industry. So I think that is something which implicitly is already happening, right? In addition to that, I think the part which Aditya missed out was that majority of the gamers are generally supposed to be men, right? That's the preconceived notion. But if you look at it, the number of women gamers are increasing, and they might not call themselves gamers because they're not playing on a PlayStation, or they're not playing the games where they might make not real money gaming, but they're still playing Candy Crush. Candy Crush is still a game, right? So that market exists, but they do not identify themselves as gamers, and that market is very big in India. So I think that's a trend that we're observing. In addition to this, regional content games. I think Nikhil is building one of them, and he's doing a good job at that. So regional content games are what are going to take games to the next 500 million Indians, right? So the metros, the cities where we need the games, or we're used to games, we've already observed that, and we've had a fair share of that. So the next phase of growth, I believe, will come from those families that have transitioned from board games to online games, and it's in their language, it's with their characters, and it's with Indian creators, it's with local creators. So within India, if with Indian creators, if we're in a different country, it'll be regional creators. So what this will also do is this will democratize socializing. So in earlier times, you could only socialize with folks who lived around you, who lived around you, or who was, say, a tight-knit circle. But in today's time, you can make virtual friends, and I might not even know Aditya, but Aditya can be a virtual friend, and he can be in a completely different city, in a completely different demographic. And as an ecosystem, as a game, that gives me a lot of power to place products, and that's say, and the ad tech industry is really booming from that. So those are my initial thoughts on this, John, but like happy to dive in further. Thank you.
Yeah. So there were a lot of thoughts there between both of you and a lot of topics that I'm going to come back to, but you actually gave me a perfect transition point. So I will say one thing is that you ignore a female demographic at your own peril if you're building a game, because this has been true in every market, is that women don't identify themselves with the term gamer, because the term gamer can be a very toxic term. No offense to those of you out there who consider yourselves as such, but it can be a harsh community to be a part of. But women absolutely play games, and they'll absolutely pay money for it, and they make up a significant portion globally of the casual gaming market. But I'm going to transition from that because you talked about a really important point, which is tier 2 and tier 3 cities, places where maybe the connection isn't as great, places where they're on the lower end of low-end smartphones. And, you know, I think we can all agree that no matter what device you're playing on, no matter what network you're playing on, you deserve to have a quality gaming experience. And so I want to turn this over to Aparna, because when we talk about scaling a game, when we talk about going into tougher markets, you know, at Akamai, we've certainly done that on the video side. So Aparna, can you help us understand what it takes to really scale a game technically and to help reach those more difficult customers?
Hey, Jonathan. So absolutely would love to. By the way, fascinating conversation so far. So, you know, and I just realized I'm a gamer myself, although I probably wouldn't have introduced my, that way before. So I'm violently agreeing with all of your points from before. So with regards to really what it takes to scale gaming, and especially in markets where, let's say, your infrastructure isn't set up exactly the same way as everywhere else. I'd probably take maybe 2 steps back and you know, have everyone think of a few dimensions as you're looking to scale out your business, you know, in this case, the gaming business. So the first and foremost is you'd have to understand where your users are. So your points of presence probably want to be very close to where your users are. So the first and foremost is understanding how wide your network needs to be and how connected it needs to be. The next part of it is obviously persistence is a huge requirement. You want to make sure that your uptime is, you know, or else, you know, as a gamer, you know, if I don't get access to the thing that I'm looking for, very easy to move on and say, I'm frustrated, you know. So the uptime is very, very important. So is real time. So the kinds of things that you want to look at is you want to offload it as close to the end user as possible, so that they're interacting with as much content as close to the end user as possible, rather than a centralized location. So you want to create sort of the compute closer to the user. The other aspect, again, speaking as a user and imagining what is probably very important, is things like 3D worlds and simulations. That's the richness of the experience. So you want to think about that, and you want to create the whole awareness of really how content is being perceived. Is it personalized? That's an aspect that can you know, sell or not the game. The next part is, and this is where, and by the way, you know, when I'm done with this, obviously I'd love to touch on each of these dimensions provides a security challenge, and how one should keep an eye on that as well. The next dimension that you know, gamers and the industry should be aware of is a continuation of the sense of identity. So most gamers want to bring their identity, that's their unique identity. These are the skills that they bring. This is how they want to be known as, between within the gaming world, or maybe in some cases from the regular real world as well. So that is something that you want your infrastructure to be aware of that and scale to those. The next couple of things are obviously how do you track history? So are there areas that, how do you track history in terms of, points that you've earned, or something specific to the game itself? And the last and definitely not least is payments. How are you tracking payments, and, how fragile is this infrastructure? So once you've laid out these dimensions, I think it's important to see what it takes for you to get your goals in each of these areas. That's how I'd advise the industry to think about it.
Okay. Now, Aditya, this must sound very familiar to you in the way that you evaluate companies. So, you are, with all of this growth in India, you're looking for probably a series of key indicators of which all of these technical challenges are a piece of, when you kind of define for yourselves who you think is going to break out and get to the next level of growth. Can you talk about how what Aparna just talked about marries up to the sort of research you do, and what are the key indicators you're looking for?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic and very fascinating question. We've looked at close to 700 gaming companies just in the last 12 to 10 months in India itself, and I think there are a couple of key things we look at. I think, and it all begins, I guess, with just the team, right? And within the team, one thing we always look out for is, do you have tech and product expertise, right? I think growth is okay, marketing is okay, but do you have someone who knows how to handle tech, and B, someone who knows how to handle product? Because at the end of the day, you're shipping this out to a bunch of users in the real world. Do you know what they want, how it should look, how it should be designed, etc.? And also, are you able to handle, is it a robust product? So I think that is key, right? In sort of what we're looking at because we look at very early stage companies. So some of these guys probably don't have an MVP, but have an idea of where this is going to head, and where it's going to be and what it's going to look like. So I think that's number one. So I think you judge just the team's capabilities and track record and sort of where they're headed from that perspective. I think that's one. The second one also is, for example, we really prefer it if there's an MVP that we can take a look at, even if you're at an early stage, right? And I think that gives us a glimpse into how you're thinking of product, but B, your execution capability, just say on the tech side, right? And are you then able to do you then also have ideas on how you can scale that, and how you can grow that, and how you go beyond all of that stuff, and how you're thinking about live ops, etc. So I think that's number two, like that gives us a sense of where it's at. And three, and sort of this doesn't apply to core gaming companies, but I think so for example, our investments Loco and Elo, where there's a lot of concurrency and etc. We also take a look at the metrics of like what are your active streamer ratios, and what's your daily active user base, what's your monthly active user base. We actually go and test the product out. Are there any bugs? Are there any issues there? And if there are very complicated tech challenges, of course, we have a network of individuals sort of all around the globe that we get these companies in touch with on sort of how XYZ can be solved for. So I think broadly on the tech side, that's how you look at it from a very early stage perspective. Is do you have the right team, and does the team have tech and product expertise, and do you know what are the challenges you're going to face going forward, and do you have some sort of idea of how you will solve that? And two is, do you have some sort of MVP that we can take a look at that gives us a glimpse into how you work about this? And the third one, of course, in sort of not in a pure sort of content gaming perspective, but when there are live ops, etc. involved, we actually go in, dig deep, try the product, try to break it basically, and take a look at the metrics and stuff like that. So that's sort of the broad framework with which we tackle that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. And about it was a year and a half ago, I actually interviewed a bunch of creative founders so founders of game companies on the creative side, and I talked to them for about an hour with VentureBeat about how they pick a CTO. And in the end, the kind of point is, if you're on the creative side of games and you're looking to launch a game, what you need to remember is a game is software as a service. And you don't really think of it that way. You're thinking of it as a game. And for those of us who are older, like me, you think of a game as a cartridge that you pop in or a disc that you pop in. And that model has entirely changed, right? Everything is online, everything is software, from your core gameplay to all of the microservices that surround your core gameplay that make it actually possible for someone to play and interact with your game, right? So that's your login and authentication, it's your matchmaking, it's your leaderboards, it's your chat, it's your microtransactions, so your virtual currency store, if you have virtual currency. All of those are connected pieces that need to be regularly updated, regularly monitored, and your content needs to change, right? So everything we're talking about not only ties into that discussion, but each of the discussions we've had here on Nikhil's channel up until now. So
yeah, if I may just add, Jonathan, I think the sort of the broader point there is it's what I think is broadly called the assetization of games in some sense, where games have stopped being point of sale products, where I think as a developer or publisher, your goal was to optimize selling, say, a Blu-ray disc or just a CD-ROM and selling it for the highest price with lowest sort of marketing cost that I can do. And with the free-to-play revolution, that barrier to entry is taken away, and then you have games turn from units that you've sold to assets that you own, because now with free-to-play, with live ops, with refreshing content, Jonathan, as you mentioned, these are theoretically perpetual revenue generating machines in some sense, right? Because you have microtransactions, you have skins, you have battle passes, etc., that you can monetize, and that goes on over and over again. And that again ties into tech very, very well, because you need to be able to handle live ops, you need to be able to handle launching content, version control, etc. So I think that's an interesting point. And I think just an interesting sort of shift in the business model of gaming just worldwide.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it goes to something that I noted you mentioned earlier, is that now you're not only thinking in terms of customer lifetime value, but also that customer lifetime value has increased dramatically in India from what people's perceptions were. So I want to actually turn the discussion quickly over to Nikhil, because this is a great place to bring Nikhil in, is that, how has this changed your calculations? And Aditya and Shahan, I'd love your feedback is here, but we'll start with Nikhil. As customer lifetime value has changed, how does that make you think about the games that you produce?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at a unique advantage over here because, I've got my own YouTube channel. So in a way, kind of, the organic marketing works in my favor. Like, for example, even for Mumbai Gullies, this game that we started out developing way back in the month of November 2020. Since then till now, in the month of January 2021, all we did was put out a trailer. And just from my YouTube channel, it was able to reach out organically to creators such as international creators such as Jabi Koe. Even in India, it caught the attention of MythPat. And also, I look at the customer acquisition more from a perspective of how well it is marketed, not only through your Google ads or Facebook ads, but also from a perspective of catching hold of these influencers that can market your game for you. We've seen Clash of Clans market their game using Liam Neeson, but nowadays, these influencers, for that matter, get you the bang for your buck. And for me personally, it's been an advantage that I'm just friends with some of these people. I can just ping them for a shout out, or even for something exciting that we did with Mumbai Gullies itself is that Jabi Koe, this international YouTuber, we are actually having him as a character within the game. So that sort of decreases our acquisition cost for the customers, because we get the goodwill of this creator directly within our game. And since we are going to also include that as a playable character, it's highly likely that their fan base comes and tries out our game. So I think there are some innovative ways through which we can utilize to do our standard customer acquisition. But that's just as at a advantage that I am at. Happy to open this stage for Aditya and Shahan.
I think it's sorry. I mean, just to your point on maximizing customer lifetime value, I think kind of ties into a couple of metrics, if I were to get technical, that we look at, and I think that's retention. So sort of the way our framework of looking at games is, you need to solve for content. Once you solve for content, you need to solve for engagement. And once you solve for engagement, you need to solve for monetization. So I think the first one, of course, around content comes down to creativity and how you're thinking about it. And of course, tech plays a major role across all three. But I think is a lot, and of course, you have certain genres that are a lot more and sort of types of games that are a lot more conducive to being these perpetual IPs, as opposed to if it's a story or a narrative driven game like an Uncharted, for example, where you've played through the whole thing and then there's a little bit of DLC, but the lack of, say, robust multiplayer, for example, kind of is a barrier to entry of it reaching the kind of game, say, a Warzone is or a Fortnite is, right? So there are and Battle Royale is a great example of a game being very conducive to this sort of model where I can just ask it being an asset and turn it into this sort of perpetual machine. So I think there's content, and then that's that. And the second one, and also a content cadence of how you're going to go about it. What's your strategy, right? Battle passes, new season drops, etc. Right. So that's one. The second one is around engagement, and what I mean by engagement is tracking your metrics. So for a mobile game, for example, if you're running say weekly campaigns, etc., you need to track your retentions, right? And this is something I at least I personally tell founders is that there's no need to spend. You don't need to spend money on UA if you have a leaky bucket. So if your D7 retention is like 3%, whatever you spend on user acquisition is all going to leak out in a week, right? So I think from an engagement perspective, looking at retention, which is absolutely key, and game devs all over the world, the most successful game devs will tell you that you need to measure retention and take action if your retention is not good, because you're going to end up with a leaky bucket, and that ties into your first time user experience and all of that stuff. Looking at also your regular daily actives, monthly actives, all that is fine, but then your K factors, and if you're an ad-driven sort of like a hyper casual or a casual genre, what your click-through rate, etc., you can look at. But I think then second thing you need to solve for is engagement. Like make sure you have a fan base that's returning and really likes the content and is staying with you and staying on board, and not just uninstalling the game within 3 days. And then I think you can move on to monetization, and that's when you I think roll out your battle passes, you roll out your in-app purchases, because now you have a fan base that sticks around. Now we have a fan base that's been served the value prop of the game, and that's when you can unleash the monetization, and that's when you sort of, I guess, start making money. But that's sort of the framework, be it Lumika and myself personally think about when it comes to just, I guess, maximizing customer lifetime value.
That's great. I wish we had you on the customer acquisition panel as well. Shahan, it looks like you've got something to add. I've got a follow-up question, so why don't you go first, and then I'll ask my follow-up.
Got it. So I think in addition to engagement and what at least I believe is that the CAC in the segment has definitely gone up for the large majority of players. So while Nikhil might be an exception because of the networks that he's developed, the first mover advantage that he has, for the largest set of players, the CAC has really gone up. And that's largely due to the fact that either they don't have the engagement, or they don't have the ability to retain what I was talking about, to retain the initial set of say customers or consumers that they've got on board for their game. So I think that's key. And in order for them to perhaps have that growth mindset, I think whether venture capital or any form of external capital, they definitely need that. So if I look at it from a developing country approach, as emerging economies, India will always need more capital, say than the United States, right? Because we need that growth, right? So same applies for, say, a sunrise sector like gaming, specifically in India. So even though, yes, there are many more gamers than before, many more people are paying for it, but the existing entrepreneurs in the gaming sector do need more firepower from external capital, and they need to achieve product market fit much faster. And they, at least they should do that by having multiple or smaller MVPs where they can test that out before they actually launch one game or bet too much on, say, one property of theirs. So that'll be my take. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, and those were all great points. This is a fast-moving space, and we've talked a lot right now about customer acquisition and how it's important to get your products up and running and out to market. And the typical admonition in tech: fail fast, and then and keep moving, keep innovating, and the importance of maintaining your customer base, right? These are all key factors when you're starting any type of company, but certainly in the games market in India. So Aparna, I'm gonna bring it back to you, because when we talk about getting a product out and getting the game in the hands of players and making sure that you keep those players, one of the big things that comes to mind is something you talked about earlier, which are the challenges around security. And we did a whole session on this where we talked about how the criminals themselves operate. But I think this is a really good opportunity for you to chime in and talk a little bit about the key trends that you're seeing from a security standpoint, and what do founders really need to be concerned with?
So loaded topic, and really, how many hours do we have at this point is my question to begin with. I think there's a lot to be said and a lot to be thought through. First and foremost, I advise everyone that's ever worried about a security challenge in an emerging space such as gaming, especially in a market like India, is to not underestimate your adversaries. They're very sophisticated, very motivated, and evolving. Somewhere out there is a group of individuals, probably on a similar session, wondering how best to monetize everything that the gaming industry is working towards. So that's the first and foremost thing to keep in mind. Now, with regards to challenges, they kind of go along with the scaling OKRs, if you will. So when you think of things like an expansive network, right? What are the security challenges there? Things like authentication, access policies, malware, encryption, DNS security, web application attacks. These are things that you want to worry about, or you want to keep in mind as you think of expanding your points of presence. When you're thinking of being persistent, again, we've talked about how important that was. You want to make sure that your uptime is as you want to be. You want to make sure that you are not open to DDoS attacks, because the surface is large, and a DDoS attack could masquerade itself as a fabulous marketing campaign, but it could get you real quick. And then things like flash crowds, again, sort of like motivated flash crowds is what I'd say. Now, in terms of keeping the games real time, etc., you want to always be aware of the trade-offs between security and performance. So as much as the gamers or the gaming industry wants to make their applications as real time as possible, you want to make sure that you're not compromising on security. So things like API security, stream protection, anti-piracy, those are the kinds of things that you want to make sure that you have an eye on and you're protecting. Now, with regards to the 3D world, simulation, etc., there's a lot to be said. There's physical access security, hardware security, content integrity, fraud in a lot of these spaces. And with the world of identity come things like secure registration, credential provisioning, authorization, again, back to understanding what your choke points are. And objects in a game are very important. So you want to think of really how are they encrypted? Do you have PII challenges? How, is there a potential for fraud? Is there a potential for IP violations, etc.? In terms of, again, history, which is, again, we can agree that is important for every, a credible game, PII, encryption of that data is huge. And lastly, with payments come a whole basket of problems. Some of this is going to be repetitive: fraud prevention, PCI compliance, tokenization, payment risk. These are the dimensions that are both challenges and areas that you must, every credible game must keep in mind. So hopefully I've given you something to think about.
Yeah, you certainly have. And I'm going to flip the question back at Aditya and Shahan, and Nikhil's already spent an hour on a different session talking about security with me. So, the question will be for the two of you, as you look at and evaluate teams that you might invest in, does security come into your mind as a part of their overall tech stack, or is that too in the weeds for the level that you guys go at? And this is a real question. You don't have to say because we're on here. Yes, we think about security. I'm really curious because yeah, let's go.
Yeah, I think it's a part of how we evaluate. So as a VC, you'll end up evaluating the tech expertise rather than a tech stack, right? So you'll end up evaluating the person who's in charge of tech, right? And because deals move so fast, etc., you cannot really get down in the weeds and evaluate the tech stack. But in certain scenarios, and this is first-hand experience, in certain scenarios where the tech stack is a very, very crucial part of the business, and is going to be a major driver of growth and driver of revenue in the future. Even if, say, we don't have the expertise to vet it, we have it vetted by, say, a professional or someone in our network who's very familiar and well versed with what is being built, right? So from that perspective, yes, tech, of course, as you mentioned, Jonathan, it's games or software as a service. So tech definitely forms the bedrock of everything you're trying to do. And from that perspective, of course, we try to form judgments on whether the people in charge are have the abilities and the caliber to execute on that tech, and B, when the tech stack, of course, forms a large part of that business and forms a very, very crucial part of that business, we either get down in the weeds and evaluate it ourselves, or have someone in our network who's probably smarter than we are, and that's mostly all the time smarter than we are, and they just go and dig in and just figure it out. So that's, I think, that's how we effectively look at it. And given that, caveat this fact that we look at very early stage companies who are just sort of then figuring out how things are going ahead. So that's broadly how we look at it.
So I think given that at least at IN we're sector agnostic, we look at very, very, very early stage companies, and definitely a majority of those which are on the tech side or are tech enabled. We definitely go down to the stage of analyzing the tech stack when there is keen interest from investors, because we get roughly 10,000 deals in a year, and we're analyzing, say, multiple sectors on multiple days. So it's not possible perhaps to go on day one or day zero of analyzing a deal, but when we are certain that, hey, we want to invest in this, then for sure that's definitely part of the process. But even before that, I think the objective here is that who I think the team is far more important from an execution perspective, because they can show you projections, they can show you how well they have done, and there's a precedent for that. But eventually, you're betting on the team, and you're betting on the opportunity. So I think the team has a major role to play, and I think in addition to that would be whether the founder can perhaps build a team by himself. So if he has like a hero team with, say, 20-25 folks, that's great enough for him to scale multiple games, multiple ventures, multiple sort of business strategies there. But if he's unable to build a team, it's very difficult for at least early stage investors to actually put their money there.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic feedback. Thank you both for that. So I'm keeping in mind that we've got about 15 minutes left of the discussion. I want to open it up for Q&A, but before we do that, I have one more question. And Shahan, we'll start with you first. And that is, what is the best advice you can give to anyone out there as they prep to look for funding? And let's keep in mind that, right, as an angel investor, you're different than Aditya, who is on the VC side. So if you can give a quick version of like why that's different and what's the advice?
Got it. So I think why we're different, because we're structured as an angel network. So I think we come differently on the cap table. But other than that, we handhold the founder from day zero till the time he's funded. We're very active in terms of scaling them up, helping them where they can't scale, helping them in follow-on rounds from a founder perspective. There have been many instances wherein our founders are looking to raise external capital, and we've gotten them connected to another fund. There have been many instances where the founder himself is confused about product market fit or how should he go about doing that. So our lead-driven approach really helps in, say, the mentoring part of it. And the angel investor network really ensures that the network effect actually kicks in and we're able to achieve that multiplier effect. So that's from, say, an ION perspective. And what was your second question, John?
The best advice you'd give someone who's looking for funding.
So, John, I would say that funding is not a milestone. I think the reason why somebody raises funds is so that perhaps they can go from, say, A to B, and funding is needed for that process. And funding will definitely help them get there. But if someone makes funding a milestone, and we are living in, I think animal spirits are really kicking in, and we're definitely seeing that in the current market. It's very good to see that. But the objective here would be that the founders should focus on building the brand, building the product, ensuring product market fit, ensuring cash flows are in place, ensuring that there's unit economics, rather than say focusing on, say, GMV, or focusing on rather than focusing on, say, GMV, or just trying to inflate the numbers. So I think unit economic positivity is very, very important.
All right, fantastic. Aditya, I'm going to ask you Nikhil, did you have something to add to that?
No, nothing.
Okay. Aditya, I'm going to ask you the same question, which is, what is the best advice you can give to anyone out there as they look for funding?
Yeah, I think Shahan has given the broader philosophical advice. So I think I'll stick to, I guess, to some extent, practical advice, for lack of a better word. I think A is, choose the investors you're going to reach out to wisely. You need to do background research. A sort of just a broad sweep. I'm going to email everyone and see what sticks. Hardly ever works. And in doing that, you need to sort of curate your inbound email as well. So I think that's one practical tip. I guess also follow up with the person you reached out to, because as analysts and associates, we get like 200 emails a day, for example, right? And it kind of sometimes might get lost in the weeds. So I think just following up as a founder perspective. Second, and this is of course not always a necessity, but at least at Lumika, we really appreciate if there's a pitch deck or some sort of investment memo or anything of that sort attached, because it goes back to this point of what's very important to us when we evaluate founders is, do you have a thesis in mind, A, and B, does that thesis then translate into a broader vision of what your product is going to be? And all of that is fine if it is useless if it's in your head. You have to be able to articulate it and sell it, right? And that's where a pitch deck, that's something that a pitch deck and a memo really allows us to do as I think investors, just to see that, are you able to articulate, can you sell this story to someone? I think that's one. And I think also from a gaming perspective, if there's an MVP that we can test out, something tangible for investors, especially investors who are sector focused, to test out, they'll know what founders reach out saying, hey, this is very raw, this is not really up there, etc. We get all of that. I think we're just looking at your ability to execute in the context of where you are at, right? So I think just having an MVP as well, I think is just having something tangible or early metrics or something along those lines. I think so that would be kind of my practical advice on how you, and also if things go ahead, make sure your sort of your company stuff is all sorted out, because getting past an IC is 1/4 of that process. The real work begins when you're actually closing documentation, and that's where sort of the horror really begins in some sense. But yeah, I think those are those sort of the practical things. But I think on an intangible front as well, and I'll go back to my point of something we really appreciate is founders having a thesis in mind. And to give you an example, is a company we invested in called Studio Sera, which is sort of building mid-core titles that are drawing characters from, say, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, that sort of universe of IP that we have. And they didn't come from traditional gaming backgrounds. They're actually one brother's a consultant, the other one was a PhD student. And what really stood out to us is they had a thesis for like, hey, the Indian gamer is maturing. They're moving from casual to mid-core. And B, there is no relevant content, right? Anything that sort of clicks in my mind saying, hey, I saw this when I was 6 years old or 7 years old, right? And that's where the idea for the Ramayana and the Mahabharata came, because these are all stories that we're familiar with. And this is, and then from that, then do you have a vision? Okay, we're going to build a studio that draws from that will keep banking on very uniquely Indian IP and build from that. And then do you understand the bridge of how do you get from vision to actually execution? Do you know what the checkpoints are? Do you have an idea of where you're going to go? And just a brief idea, I know things are always going to go south on you, but just a sense of what it's going to take for you to reach there. Do you know who to hire? Do you know, for example, a tech stack you need to build? All of that stuff. I think having that figured out is super important, and that ties into sort of my final practical point is, once you have all of that figured out, I think you can go to an investor with and this is something I appreciate, go to an investor saying, this is how much I'm raising and this is the valuation I have in mind. Don't, and that number has to be justifiable in some way, right? So I think that's another sort of practical point I'd give to folks who are reaching out to investors just to fundraise. And this is, of course, from what we've seen at Lumika and my experiences. So yeah, that's probably that.
Thank you. That's fantastic advice. And I will add, because Shahan much earlier talked about regionalization of content. Don't, as you in India come up with ideas for your games and you're basing it on your own culture, for your own culture, don't ignore the global market, because we love your stories and we want your stories. I played Raji in Ancient Epic and found it to be absolutely delightful and reminded me of things that I learned when I was younger about Indian culture and religion. I would say there are only so many games the rest of the world can play that are about Vikings, but that seems to not be the case. But we can have more than just Viking games. So, and we're ready for it. So I've got Aparna, I want to turn it over to you briefly, because, we've talked about what founders should look at, the general advice for them. What sort of advice do you have in choosing a technology partner? And then the last question will be for Nikhil, who gets the last word.
So in choosing a technology partner, you want, obviously, it would be an ideal situation if you had a technology partner that had the experience of having scaled from a zero to a very large, audience and a business. And that's not always possible. The most important thing is a culture fit, I guess. You want to make sure that these are people that you can work with, that this is a team that you can collaborate and partner very closely. The second part of it is it a learning culture? Is it a team that is willing to learn from both their own experiences and from what the industry's, industry at large is seeing? And then the last one is, are they moving iteratively? And this is true, by the way, for all industries. There is, if one is in a mindset of, hey, you know what, I'm going to put out my my best foot forward after years or months of development these days, and then see how it pans out, you're in for not a pleasant surprise. So you choose to ignore details at your own peril. So what's important is the ability to rapidly prototype, know your customer base, and then get that feedback, incorporate that feedback, and then go back out with incremental updates, etc. So I'd say that a mindset, and then obviously the technical chops to understand really what it takes to scale, and then monitor yourself as you're growing. I'd say these are the dimensions that one should look for when looking for a technology partner.
All right, fantastic. And Nikhil, this is your channel, and we're really bumping up at the end, so maybe we'll get one for Q&A. But you've heard a lot of advice now over the last few minutes. What do you think, as someone who's actually founded a studio and is running this all? How does all of this, all the advice we've just given, jive with your personal knowledge?
I've made a note of all of this, and I'm going to use all of this information for my Series A round. So thanks a lot for Aditya and Shahan for giving your valuable advice, not just for myself but also for the general audience, because this has been a challenge so far that gaming was not looked upon as a proper business. But that narrative is changing slowly and steadily, because of thanks to venture capitalist funds like Lumikai Fund taking initiative and being a proper sector focused VC in this space. These guys are doing amazing. And very briefly, when we had a chance to interact with them, and I can vouch for them that these guys do take the founders very seriously. So I would say, for a founder, if you want to raise funds, as Shahan mentioned, funding is not a milestone. We, as a company, we were founded back in 2013, but we raised our very first round from Mumbai Angels this very year. So it took us a while to reach where we are. I think what Shahan also, what Aditya also mentioned about retention, and that is the key. Measure your metrics, and because without those metrics you will just end up spending money, and then there'll be no real value created. Obviously you guys can check out more about retention, what that means and all, on my channel. Additionally, this is a very heavy day for me personally, because we are at the last day of Akamai Gaming Masterclass. We've had some amazing discussions to this date. And guys, if you have missed any of the session, I've actually created a curated playlist for Akamai Gaming Masterclass. You can check that out at your own convenience. Last but not the least, just be brave and put your games out there. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we're bumping up right on time. I don't think we should dive into Q&A. I think instead we should probably just have a nice close. What do you think?
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
So in that case, first, Aditya, Aparna, Shahan, thank you so much for your time today. Nikhil, of course, thank you, but I'll get to my thanks to you in a moment. But really, this was a fascinating discussion. I personally learned a lot. I hope that those listening learned a lot. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your evenings, and Aparna, in your case as well as mine, your early mornings. For those of you who've been with me over several episodes, you can see the sun rising behind me. It's just 7:30 in the morning here in the Boston area. So thank you to my panelists. For the audience, thank you all for joining us. This has been quite a ride. If this is your first episode or your fifth episode of this series, I hope you've had a wonderful time. And if it's not your fifth episode, I hope you go back and watch the other ones. And my last thank you is to Nikhil. Nikhil, I'm sad about this. This has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed being with you these past couple of weeks. I think it's just been an amazing experience, and I really appreciate your generosity in hosting us and giving us time and space on your channel. You've just been very gracious, and it's been wonderful. So
most welcome, John. Thanks, John. Thanks to you. Thanks, Aditya. Thanks, Aparna. Thanks, Shahan, for taking our time from your busy schedules. Guys, this brings us to the close of Akamai Gaming Masterclass. We are very short on time. We'll be ending this in about a minute. So guys, if you like this session, be sure to hit the like button. check out Akamai.com as well as their services, because they offer some really good infrastructure services. And if you get stuck anywhere or you want to scale up your games, these are your go-to guys. These are your partners. They will help you throughout each and every step. A big shout out to Lumikai Fund as well as Indian Angel Network. Guys, these guys are very approachable. You can find these guys on LinkedIn. They are very active as well. So if you guys have any doubts with regards to how to raise funds, etc., feel free to get in touch with them. With that in mind, I will close the session. Thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.